When I was 8, Julian shoved me down the stairs and my wrist snapped. He cried when our parents showed up and said it was an accident. I got grounded for starting it. That's how life worked in our house. Julian made the mess, and I was the one who took the blame or cleaned it up. He was the golden boy with the bright smile and smooth stories. I was difficult. He skipped school, took cash from Dad's wallet, talked back to Mom. They called it boys being boys. I got long talks for being too sensitive and making things tense. If I cried, I was dramatic. If I spoke up, I was the problem. By 13, I learned to be quiet. My room became my shelter. Door locked, headphones on, schoolwork my escape. Julian barged in whenever he wanted, grabbed what he liked, and laughed at the rest. My parents barely looked up. On my birthdays, I got gift cards and quick hugs. He got parties and cheers. Every year, I felt myself getting smaller. At 17, I put everything I owned into 2 bags and left without a plan. I was done living in a house that never felt safe. No one came after me, no one called. It was like they'd been waiting for me to go. I slept on couches, worked small jobs, learned to live with very little, and got used to the quiet. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was closer than what I'd had. Years later, when the world fell apart and I ran out of options, I made the mistake of calling home. The hotel where I worked shut down with a group email and a final paycheck that barely hit. The rent. I had 3 weeks to figure out my life. My roommate packed and left for her parents' place. I didn't have that luxury. I sold what I could, donated the rest, and used the last of my savings to buy a beat-up camper shell for my truck. It leaked when it rained and smelled like wet cardboard, but it was mine. I asked my mom if I could park in their driveway for a few weeks. She hesitated. Julian and Mira had moved in, she said, and the house was full. Mira texted a day later. Hope the truck bed's cozy. I found a grocery store lot where they didn't tow and learned how to stretch meals from a cooler and instant food. I ran a cord from church outlets when no one was looking and used a 24-hour gym to shower. It was the lowest I'd ever been, but in the quiet, I learned to live without asking anyone for help. I found out what I needed and what I could endure. I learned to sleep through sirens and wake without fear. I didn't know it then, but that leaky camper was the first thing I'd truly owned. A friend of a friend got me a job at a shipping warehouse in the next city. Not glamorous, boxes, forklifts, early mornings, late nights, but better than minimum wage, and no one asked many questions. The manager, Ron, had sun-creased skin and a smoker's laugh. He glanced once at the camper on my truck and just nodded. I parked by the back fence where no one looked twice. As long as I showed up and did my work, no one cared where I slept. That saved me. I woke before dawn, pulled on gloves, loaded pallets, kept my head down. They cared if I was on time and pulled my weight. I was. I grabbed every hour of overtime and every weekend shift. I didn't have anywhere better to be, and work kept my mind steady. When winter hit, Ron let me run a heavy-duty extension cord from the building so I could use a small heater. I told him I'd work Sundays for free to cover the power. He waved me off, and I worked Sundays anyway. Slowly, I built up savings. I bought new tires. I replaced the insulation in the camper. I got a gym membership just for the showers. On weekends, I sat inside with a warm drink, listening to rain drum the roof, feeling strangely safe. It wasn't just shelter. It was mine. I kept my world small. No calls to my family. No updates online. The silence that once hurt became freedom. Months passed, quiet and steady. One afternoon, after a long shift, I saw a listing taped to the break room wall. A small house close by with a payment I might be able to afford. I almost walked away. My hand took the number anyway. It was nothing fancy, a 3-bedroom manufactured home with faded siding and a sagging step, but it had plumbing, a solid roof, and walls that would be mine. I put almost every dollar I had into the down payment and cried in the loan office, parking lot after signing. Not from sadness, more like a mix of relief and shock. I didn't tell anyone. I just drove by in the evenings, watched it glow under the porch light like it was waiting for me. When I finally moved in, I slept on the floor the first night, wrapped in blankets, space heater humming. It was the best sleep I'd had in years. The next day, I parked the truck in back, lowered the camper off the bed, cleaned it, covered it with a tarp, and tucked it near the fence like a quiet trophy of how far I'd come. A week later, on impulse, I posted a picture on Facebook. Just the porch light and the numbers, captioned, "Built this life from the back of a truck." I didn't expect much. A few likes, a message from an old coworker, then silence. 3 weeks later, they showed up. Julian and Mira, my parents, all 4 of them on my porch like they'd been invited. I never gave them my address. They never asked. I opened the door, still in shock, and they filed in without waiting. They wandered through the rooms like they were touring a model home. Mira leaned in to whisper to Julian and giggled. My mother smiled and ran her fingers along the hallway wall. "You've got a lot of space for one person," she said. My father stood in the kitchen like he was already rearranging the cabinets. I followed them, heart pounding, mouth dry. It felt like a slow invasion. When they finally left, Julian lingered, hand on the doorframe. "Let's talk," he said. "I've got something you'll want to hear." He came back the next day alone, holding a to-go cup and wearing that easy confidence he'd always had. He knocked once and let himself in like it was still our parents' house and I was just borrowing space. "I've been thinking," he started, dropping into a kitchen chair like it belonged to him. "This place makes sense for us. It's closer to my job, good schools, you've got extra rooms." He smiled like he'd brought me good news. "Mira's pregnant again, by the way. We could really use the space." I waited for the joke. It didn't come. "You'd still be here, obviously," he went on, waving a hand. "But we'd need the master for the baby. You could take the smaller room or honestly just move back into the camper. You were fine there before, right?" I didn't answer. He leaned back and tapped the table. "We'd need some structure, too. Quiet hours, no guests without checking. With us, we'd split groceries, but Mira cooks, so that's a win for you." Something in me finally snapped. Not loud, not wild, just like a wire pulled too tight for too long. I stood, hands on the table, and looked him in the eye. "No." He blinked. "What do you mean, no?" "You're not moving in," I said. "You're not taking my bedroom. You're not making rules in my house. And I'm not sleeping in a camper so you and Mira can play house in something you didn't earn." His smile slipped. "Celeste, be reasonable." "I've been reasonable. My whole life," I said. "I was reasonable when Mom let you lie about breaking my wrist. I was reasonable when you borrowed my college fund for a business idea. I was reasonable when I slept behind a warehouse and none of you cared where I was." He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him. "This is my house, mine. You don't get to take it." He left without finishing his coffee. For the first time in years, the silence that followed felt like something I chose. One Thursday, I pulled into the driveway and something felt off. The welcome mat was crooked, the porch light was on, the living room blinds were open. My front door, key didn't fit. I tried again, slower, hands shaking. Still nothing. I walked around and saw Julian's truck by the curb, tailgate down. Through the window, I saw Mira stacking boxes in my hallway. Julian stepped behind her, holding one of my blankets. They weren't about to move in. They already had. I knocked hard. Mira turned and smirked. Julian opened the door like I was the intruder. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "This is my house," I said, ice in my voice. He held up a crumpled paper. "You signed this rental agreement. You said we could take the place for a while." My name was scribbled at the bottom. The signature didn't even match. "You forged that," I said. Mira came up behind him, arms crossed, belly showing. "Don't be dramatic, Celeste. You left the door wide open. We just made it official." I pulled out my phone and started recording. Julian tried to block the lens. I kept filming. "You are trespassing," I said, "and you broke my lock." Mira slapped the phone from my hand. It hit the floor hard, still recording. I called the police. They came in 10 minutes. I showed my deed, the texts, even the Facebook post with the house number and date. Julian pushed the fake lease. Mira cursed at the officers and said I'd abandoned the place. It didn't work. They were told to leave at once. The officers waited while they dragged boxes back to the truck. Mira muttered threats the whole time. When the door shut, the air inside was still warm from them. I locked it twice and stood in the hallway, heart pounding like the house itself needed to. Remember who it belonged to. I posted the video with no caption, just Julian waving the forged lease, Mira slapping the phone, my voice calm and steady. I thought no one would care. Then the comments started. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years reached out. An aunt in California messaged, "Now it makes sense. I always wondered why you vanished." People from work said, "Good for you." That took guts. Mira disappeared from social media. Julian went quiet. My parents skipped their usual Sunday brunch posts. Their silence said enough. A few evenings later, my parents stood on my porch. No warning, no apology. "Julian's having a hard time," my mom said. "This is making it worse." My dad added, "You've proved your point. Can't you let it go, for the family?" I looked at them and didn't flinch. "I am doing this for the family," I said, "for the part of the family that never tried to steal from me." They stared. Just then, my cousin Naomi pulled into the driveway. She got out and stood beside me. She didn't need to say a word. That was the last time my parents tried to guilt me. That weekend, I made a spare key for Naomi. A week later, Julian texted like nothing had happened. "Hey, can we talk? It's about the kids and rent." I met him in the driveway. He showed up alone, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes restless. Mira wasn't working. The kids were growing. Formula and diapers were expensive. They'd fallen behind. He didn't ask to move in again. This time it was money. "Even a few hundred a month," he said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get mad. I opened my spreadsheet and showed him my costs: property tax, insurance, repairs. Then I showed him a list of incoming tenants. I'd started renting the back room and the small basement studio to 2 women from work. They were quiet, respectful, and paid on time. "I don't have money to spare," I said. "I didn't buy this place to become a bank for someone who tried to take it." He didn't argue. He nodded and walked back to his truck. A few days later, Mira drove by and screamed out the window, called me a thief, a traitor, a cold, barren witch. I stood at the sink, watched through the curtain, and didn't move. The tenants came later with suitcases and groceries. One baked bread and brought me a warm loaf. The other watered the lawn before work each morning. The house felt different, full, quiet, peaceful. That night, I pulled the tarp off the camper to air it out. I didn't know it then, but I'd need it again, just not for me. The rumors started small: a coworker, a neighbor, someone who knew Mira. Then a screenshot landed in my inbox and made everything clear. She'd been seeing another man, not just once, over most of their marriage. Julian denied it until the dates didn't match and the baby didn't look like him. A test ended the guessing. The youngest wasn't his. When the results came, something cracked in him. Mira didn't take it well. She threw things and screamed in front of the kids. When their oldest tried to step between them, she turned on him too. Someone called the police. They found her outside, barefoot and shaking, yelling into the night. She was taken in. Julian stood in the driveway holding his son's hand. I didn't reach out. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The divorce was quick. Mira disappeared. Arizona, they said. She didn't take the kids. Julian moved back in with our parents. I heard he barely spoke. My parents stopped showing up at church. No more bragging. No more excuses. I sat on my porch with a warm drink and listened to the quiet. Not happy, not angry. Just still. A few days later, Julian came back to my steps. This time, he wasn't here for the house. He didn't knock. He stood at the bottom of the stairs with his hands in his pockets and his eyes heavy. I opened the door and didn't invite him in. He didn't ask. "I'm not here to ask for the house," he said. "I know better." I waited. "It's for Luca," he said. "He can't sleep at Mom and Dad's. Too much noise, too many people. He asked if we could live somewhere quiet. He misses having space." I looked past him at the camper under the tree, clean, covered, waiting. I thought of all the nights I shivered under thin blankets and told myself I was safe. I thought of how that little box had kept me alive when no one would help. I'm not giving it to you, I said. I'm not asking you to, he said. I walked him to the backyard and told him he could park it behind the house where I could keep an eye on things. There would be rules, no loud visitors, no Mira, no overnight guests I hadn't met. I wrote it all down, had him sign it, and filmed us shaking hands. He didn't argue. Thank you, he said quietly. Really. I handed him the spare keys and went inside. He moved in that night. By morning, I heard the soft thump of a soccer ball on the grass. One night, long after the kids were asleep, I heard a muffled sound from the camper. I went out expecting a mess. Julian sat on the floor with his shoulders shaking and his hands over his face. I ruined everything, he whispered. I let her wreck us, and I let them wreck you. I didn't interrupt. I didn't touch him. I let him speak until the silence stretched between us like a bridge we both knew we wouldn't cross. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. I just wanted you to know I see it now. All of it. I nodded once and left him there, with his grief. Days settled into a new rhythm. The kids stayed longer in the yard. They helped water the garden, drew chalk pictures on the driveway, brought me little bouquets made from weeds. They didn't ask questions. They just stayed close. One Sunday, my parents came by. No speech, no defense, just tired eyes. We were wrong, my mother said. You didn't deserve it. For once, they didn't ask for anything in return.